Should you edit your film? Yes, 100%. And if you keep watching, I will show you why and how. I hope you're watching this video from a place of peace in your life. If this is your first time here, my name is Dave. I'm a photographer and filmmaker from the Bay Area of California. I hope to educate and empower you with information on this channel, so be sure to subscribe if that resonates with you. And if you ever reach out to me, I will always respond because community comes first. So follow along and join this community. Okay, let's start off with some realities about film. Okay, so this is color negative film. I'm sure you know this stuff already. This is color positive film. I'm gonna put these both up here to let you see them. One looks like a photo and the other one needs a process to turn it into a photo. These are the two types of films that you can shoot today, and they've been around for a very long time. Now, slide film has been around longer than color negative film, but color negative film was a huge innovative breakthrough because it's easier to manufacture, it's much easier and simpler to develop, and it has more latitude for you to capture photos with more dynamic range of lighting. Slide films like Kodachrome, Ektachrome, and all the other slide films, especially the older ones, had very little forgiveness, but color negative typically has quite a bit of forgiveness. And our film cameras are nothing more than just a light-sealed box. And when we put that film into that camera and through that camera, we open up the shutter and light comes through the lens, hits the film, and when we're done with a roll of film, we have all of our film inside of this nice little light sealed capsule that we are going to either take out and develop ourselves or give to a lab to develop for us. And once that film is developed, you can either scan those negatives yourself or have the lab do it. So if you're going to scan that film yourself, you have a few options. You can use a flatbed scanner or a tower scanner that you stick your film in. You can use something like this setup right here, which is a camera and a macro lens, and then the light table goes here, and you put your negatives there, and you take a photo of it, and there you go, you've scanned your film. And of course, there are plenty of other ways that you can get a photo of that negative, sometimes even with your smartphone, with any type of backlight. There's just a lot of ways to get that negative digitized. Now again, that's all if you do it. You could also have a lab do it. And if you have a lab do it, you're likely going to encounter one of two options to have them either scan it on a Frontier, which is made by Fuji, or scan it on a Noritsu, which is made by Noritsu. These are just two different scanners that labs have been using for quite a while. Now, this video is not about all of the differences of developing at home or having a lab develop, or scanning at home with the different ways you can scan, or having a lab scan it on a Frontier or a Noritsu. I just wanted to demonstrate here that there are a ton of variables in between the time that light hit that film inside of your camera and then getting to you as an image that you can see and understand. Because it's really easy to just assume that if you shoot with a certain film stock, you're going to have just this certain look, and that's how it is for everybody, and that could not be further from the truth. Because if a lab scans your film, there are going to be two factors in play. One is the scanner that they are using, whether it's a Frontier or a Noritsu. But the second factor is going to be that lab technician themselves, their technical skills, as well as their preferences when they scan your film. That lab technician is the first editor to encounter your photos. And if you scan at home and you use some software like Negative Lab Pro, well, you're going to have software being your initial technician and editor, and it's going to go ahead and give you a starting point that it believes is accurate for the film that you just scanned. And everything that I've said up to this point is really just to demonstrate that by the time your eyes see the photo, you know, that beautiful, grainy, trendy film photo, it has been edited. But now you get to make it yours. So let's talk about how to edit film photos. Now, this is my personal preference, but I also think it's an educated opinion. If you're working with a lab and you've got this look really dialed in with them, then this won't apply to you. But if you're just getting a lab to develop and scan your film, and you get the option to choose what kind of scan you're going to get back, always choose a flat scan. You want something that's fairly low in contrast and a little desaturated, but that has a lot of dynamic range. Kind of like a video log file, if you know what I'm I'm talking about. Over the years, I've worked with several labs. I'm going to list them all right here. And some of these labs do a better job than others at letting you determine the type of scan you are going to get on the front end. If you were to send your film to a lab, have them develop it and scan it, and then you get back something that's pretty stylistically dialed in, and it looks like maybe them, not so much like you, there of course are techniques you can do to try to edit your way out of that, but a better thing to do is to work with a lab that has the kind of look that you are going after. Now I'm talking about if you're going to get a scan from that lab that is already in the direction you want to take it in. So the point of this is just to say, like, choose your lab wisely. Now, if you are scanning at home, and whether you're using a flatbed or you're using something like I'm using, which is a camera with a macro lens, the same mentality applies. You want to get that negative to a positive as flat as possible. And here's the big reason. If you are editing in something like Lightroom and you're using Negative Lab Pro, which runs inside of Lightroom, of course you can make all of your edits inside of the Negative Lab Pro dialog, but if you try to touch any of the sliders, everything's going to be backwards because you're working off of a negative and the positive flip is happening within something like Negative Lab Pro. And as a photographer who edits a lot of digital files, you probably know the Lightroom interface pretty well, or the Capture One interface pretty well. You're pretty efficient with it and you know what the tools do. It's also pretty refined at this point, whereas something like Negative Lab Pro has a ton of range and flexibility, but you might not be as efficient in it. And look, I deal with film photography a lot, and I want to get that photo into Lightroom as quick as possible so that I can begin to edit it in an efficient way that I know and understand and can wrap my head around. So for the most part, I just want to flip it to a positive and then lower that contrast, make sure that it's bright and clear, and then I'm ready to go. I'm ready to get it into a positive and get it as a JPEG to its next destination. Alternatively, you don't have to use Negative Lab Pro. Some people don't want to buy another app, and if you already have Lightroom and the Photographer Suite or the entire Adobe Suite, this is just as easy to do in Photoshop. All you have to do is go up to your image menu and flip it by inverting it, and now it is a positive. At this point, what you're going to do is add a curve adjustment to that positive and then open up the R, G, and B channels, and then just move the black and white points to where the information is in the histogram. It doesn't need to be exact, but make it look as natural as possible by doing this, and then export it and get it into a JPEG and into Lightroom. And once you get it into a JPEG and into Lightroom, you are now at the same place you would be at if a lab had developed it for you and sent you something to download. And of course, you can do this with a TIFF instead of a JPEG if you want more dynamic range, but I'll be honest with you, I rarely, if ever, mess with TIFFs, and I just use JPEGs. Now that we are in Lightroom, we're going to evaluate the red, green, and blue channels just like we did in Photoshop. We're going to do it now in Lightroom, and we're going to make any adjustments on the shadow side to make sure that we've got the right amount of contrast happening in this photo. And I'll be honest, most lab scans I get need this step done. If I did it myself, it doesn't always need this step, but lab scans, I would say like 9 out of 10 lab scans, I'm doing this step. I'm just gonna go to the red channel and bring the dark tones over, same with the green channel, and then same with the blue channel. I'm just going to put it to where the information is. Most of the time, I'm not gonna do this on the highlights because all that's gonna do is make the photo brighter. And I can do that with exposure. I don't necessarily have to do that here. Once you have this histogram work done, you have typically fixed any flat, faded, or miscolored photos by the lab. And it does happen. All three of those situations happen. At this point, I typically will add any contrast using the black and shadows and the white and highlights slider, and I will not touch the global contrast until the very end, so we'll come to that in just a minute. So dial your contrast in using blacks and shadows and whites and highlights. I typically find that I'm pulling down blacks and shadows fairly significantly when I edit film, but that's again like a stylistic choice, so do what feels right for you. The next thing I will do is I will start tweaking the temperature of the photo, but because it's a JPEG and also because I want to stay pretty true to real life, I'm not going to smoke that thing up too far either direction. One thing that I have found that I will do a lot of the times is if I just want to add a little touch of warmth to the highlights, I will go back to the blue channel in the histogram and I'll put a point in the middle, and then I will bring down ever so slightly the highlights from blue into yellow. What this will typically do is put a little warmth into the sky and into those highlights, and I don't have to go down and do any further adjustments to the temperature slider. Next up, I will hit those HSL sliders and make a few adjustments here. Typically for film photos, I like reds to be red, so I won't touch the hue, but I will definitely turn up the saturation on red. I don't typically touch the orange unless I feel like it really needs it. Yellow and green, I might desaturate a little bit if I feel like they need it, but I will typically shift green towards green a little more and yellow towards orange a little bit. Again, that's just a stylistic choice that I make. And then for blue tones, I really feel like it depends on the film stock. For something like Portra, I tend to make sure blues are a little more desaturated, but on something like Ektar, or if I'm shooting slide film, I will make blues much more vibrant and blue. I rarely, if ever, will touch the luminance because the luminance is really the thing that keeps film true to film, because that's really how the light hit the film plane. And so you don't want to touch the luminance unless you feel like you have to for some reason. The final thing that I will do is potentially, depending on the film stock or the lighting conditions, I might add a touch of warm tones into the shadows and cool tones into the highlights, or the other way around. But that's really it, and that is a minimal thing that I'll do is in the color grading. At the end of all this is when we'll go back up to the top of the Lightroom sliders and we'll begin to make changes to the global contrast. And a lot of times I'm taking contrast away at this point, and perhaps maybe even adjusting the exposure based upon what I see visually as well as where the histogram is hitting. So I'm using visual information, not just from the photo and how it looks, but also how it's reading in the histogram to make sure that the light is pretty even and dispersed well. And that is the process that I use when I go to edit my film. Editing your film is completely and totally normal. It's a normal thing to do for a photographer. There is no look that Kodak or Fuji or any other manufacturer determined in a lab in isolation. There's a lot of different points and variables to get the look that you're seeing in your film. And that's true of your work, and it's true of everything you see online on Instagram, those film photographers, whatever you're looking at. There's so many variables to go from the time that the light hit that film plane inside of their camera to what you are seeing and experiencing. There's so many variables. So don't be afraid to jump in and edit your film and give it a try and determine what your look with that film stock is. I think of film and editing like partnership. You know, the film has some predetermined characteristics, but I partner with the film to bring my take to it. And that's why if you look at my film work, it still looks like my work. It still sits in harmony with my digital work, and no matter what film stock I'm shooting, it harmonizes with itself. I hope you found this video to be helpful and informative for you. If you've got any tips on how you edit film, some of your best practices and things that you've learned, be sure to leave them in a comment below for the community to see and experience. And as always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you next time.